Hey besties, welcome back to my channel. So is Taylor Swift now borrowing a page from the Blake Lively playbook and attempting to blame bots for what's being framed as an inorganic smear campaign against her? Because that's essentially how Rolling Stone presented it. What's interesting is that a Rolling Stone article tried to link a supposed smear campaign against Blake Lively from the summer of 2024 to what it described as an inorganic campaign against Taylor Swift following the release of her new album in October. Without any real scientific data and very much ignoring the idea that correlation does not equal causation, Rolling Stone relied on a report from a tiny, largely unknown software company that claims it can analyze online data and algorithms. The article strongly implied that whatever happened to Blake Lively was also happening to Taylor Swift, and that because both situations overlapped, Justin Baldoni and his team must somehow be behind it. That implication understandably set people off. Comment sections exploded. My favorite Reddit subreddit, yes, the one that ends with lawsuits, was in full meltdown mode. Other outlets then picked up the story and began regurgitating it over and over, all repeating the same vague claim that there was a coordinated smear campaign involving Nazi bots tied to Taylor Swift, Blake Lively, and somehow Justin Baldoni as well. Naturally, people were confused and angry. Swifties were upset, supporters of Justin Baldoni were upset, everyone was asking the same question. What does this even mean? How is any of this connected? Then, yesterday, The Verge published an article that actually added some much-needed context. It gave more insight into who this mystery company is and why Rolling Stone ran the piece in the first place. But there was also a statement, essentially a disclaimer about Taylor Swift's PR, that made me pause, because it suggested there may be more involvement here than anyone wants to admit. The article is titled, "A Vague Study on Nazi Bots Created Chaos in the Taylor Swift Fan Universe." It explains that on December 9th, Rolling Stone published what many interpreted as a bombshell, a claim that a network of coordinated, inauthentic social media accounts had influenced a week-long discourse following the release of Swift's album, The Life of a Showgirl. At first glance, the controversy looked like standard fandom versus anti-fandom chaos, exactly what you'd expect after a highly anticipated album from one of the biggest artists in the world. But The Verge argues that this cycle of trending discourse snowballing into non-stop social media activity reflects deeper problems in the modern media ecosystem, where misaligned incentives turbocharge outrage and misinformation. 2 months later, new research from a little-known social listening firm appeared to upend the public understanding of how that discourse spread. Rolling Stone reported on findings from a company called Guadia, which claims to provide early visibility into emerging online narratives. Guadia says it analyzed 24,679 posts from 18,213 users across 14 platforms following the album's release. According to the report, inauthentic narratives originating on fringe platforms like 4chan eventually migrated to mainstream platforms like X and TikTok, where real users began debating whether Swift was pushing Nazi symbolism and even comparing her to Kanye West. Guadia concluded that this demonstrated how strategically seeded falsehoods can evolve into widespread, authentic discourse, reshaping public perception even when most users don't believe the original claim. For some Swift fans, this was irrefutable proof that the controversy was the work of bots and chaos agents, and they celebrated accordingly. But Guadia's report and Rolling Stone's coverage of it sparked a second wave of backlash. This time, the debate spiraled into theories about Swift's PR strategy, Guadia's legitimacy, and the role of media outlets themselves. Critics pushed back hard, arguing that Taylor Swift wasn't the helpless victim of a bot campaign. People had simply failed at basic media literacy. On TikTok, creators rushed to post smug "I told you so" videos, seizing yet another opportunity to dunk on each other. All of this chaos stemmed from a bare-bones report that essentially poured gasoline on an already raging fire. The Verge then digs into who Guardia actually is. The company has only existed since 2023, has a sparse website, and this appears to be the only report of its kind it has ever published. There's almost no public information about its staff or prior clients. That vacuum fueled accusations that Guardia was created, or at least deployed, specifically to publish a report favorable to Swift, possibly in coordination with Rolling Stone, as a way to launder her image through the press. Some critics went even further, alleging that Guardia uses generative AI to discredit legitimate criticism and, most offensively, that the report dismissed real human critique by labeling it as bot activity. And to be fair, there was legitimate criticism of Swift. Some listeners, including Black women, called out specific lyrics, imagery, and symbolism they felt were racist or culturally appropriative. The Verge contacted the Rolling Stone reporter who covered the Guardia findings, Miles Klee. He stated that Rolling Stone did not commission the report and that Taylor Swift is not Guardia's client. Klee, who often writes from a perspective critical of MAGA culture and defensive of Swift against the right, clarified that the article was not claiming all criticism came from bots. In an email, Klee wrote that the piece does not suggest that every account accusing Swift of supporting Trump or harboring white supremacist views is part of an influence network. Many people made those claims earnestly, he said, but a subset of the content appeared to come from coordinated accounts that don't resemble typical users. The point, according to Klee, was that extreme rhetoric online can originate from bad actors attempting to manipulate discourse. The article also acknowledged something Rolling Stone arguably failed to emphasize. Much of the criticism Swift received was stable and organic. Conversations about cultural appropriation, her use of African American vernacular English, album quality, her wealth, and her ethics were all genuine conversations. The report only attempted to attribute the Nazi imagery discourse to coordinated activity. Still, there was something deeply off about the entire analysis. The Verge noted major methodological flaws, missing key details, unclear metrics, and a lack of transparency around how data was measured or categorized.
Rather than simply analyzing online discourse, the report claims to examine how actors generate polarization, segment audiences into opposing camps, and manipulate platform algorithms for strategic or harmful ends. This is where things start to feel strange. According to the article, this company allegedly produced the report for no reason at all, without any outside prompting, and then provided it exclusively to Rolling Stone, where it effectively functioned as free advertising for the firm. When The Verge sought comment from Taylor Swift's publicist, Tree Payne declined to respond after learning that The Verge would not agree to her conditions, speaking only on background, off the record, and without being quoted or attributed. The Verge explained that this violates its long-standing policy for communications professionals, which exists to prevent powerful figures or companies from shaping narratives anonymously while shifting the legal and ethical risk onto the publication. If Taylor Swift truly had no involvement in this report, then what background information would her publicist even need to provide? The response could simply have been, Taylor Swift had nothing to do with this. There would be no reason to insist on anonymity. The fact that Payne was apparently willing to speak only if she could not be quoted suggests that she did have something to say, something she did not want publicly attributed to her. In other words, there was background to give, but not without shielding its source. That strongly implies that unnamed sources speaking to the media may, in fact, be her. The article also notes that the report was provided exclusively to Rolling Stone, with Presley claiming this was because it aligned with the writer's beat, described as a typical arrangement for a small firm seeking media exposure. But that raises another question. How does a relatively unknown, very small company with no significant track record manage to reach a high-profile journalist who specifically covers Taylor Swift, and then secure prominent coverage that conveniently reframes criticism she had recently received? The firm further claims that the report was produced independently and not at the request of any outside party. Presley says GDIA contacted legal counsel believed to represent Taylor Swift using publicly available contact information after the report was completed, and that they never heard back. Yet, given Payne's apparent willingness to speak only off the record, it is entirely possible that communication did occur and is simply being omitted, such as Payne expressing approval of the report or facilitating its handoff to Rolling Stone. Adding to the skepticism, media scholar Jessica Maddox, who is also a Taylor Swift fan, points out serious methodological flaws in the report itself. There is no detailed explanation of how the sample was collected, no breakdown of platforms, for example, how many posts came from 4chan versus X, no sample posts, no stated research questions, and no information about what statistical tests, if any, were used. Instead, the company told Rolling Stone that the report was prompted by a gut feeling from someone on staff. As a result, the report and the coverage based on it lacks rigor, transparency, and demonstrable evidence. It relies heavily on surface-level analysis while dismissing accusations of racism or fascism as ridiculous or bizarre, a framing that understandably struck a nerve. Maddox ultimately argues that if Taylor Swift had actually been involved, the report would likely have been more polished and persuasive. As it stands, it satisfies neither devoted fans nor serious critics. It is neither a convincing defense nor a credible critique. Which brings us back to the central absurdity. We are meant to believe that someone at this obscure company simply had a gut feeling about Taylor Swift, produced a poorly substantiated report, and that this report just happened, by coincidence, to land in Rolling Stone at exactly the right moment.
And yet, Rolling Stone chose to rely on this report, even though it clearly lacks solid methodology, something Maddox and others have already pointed out. What makes this even more troubling is that the report attempts to link criticism of Taylor Swift to the same users supposedly involved in a so-called smear campaign against Blake Lively, a smear campaign that, frankly, never actually happened. Somehow, Justin Baldoni's name then gets dragged into all of this, and from the outside, it really looks like Taylor's PR team fed this narrative to Rolling Stone as a way to explain away legitimate criticism. No one is denying that people on fringe sites like 4chan sometimes latch on to major cultural moments and post inflammatory nonsense. That happens all the time. Most people can tell the difference between trolling and genuine critique. This article, however, didn't bother to make that distinction. What bothered so many people, including a lot of you watching, was the attempt to link Taylor Swift's situation to Blake Lively's by rewriting what actually happened last summer. In August of 2024, no one was accusing Blake Lively of being a Nazi. No one was claiming she wore swastikas or was tied to MAGA extremism. That simply did not happen. What did happen was much more straightforward and entirely organic. People were upset about Blake's behavior during the promotional tour. They didn't like how she chose to market the film. They noticed Justin Baldoni's absence. They were already familiar with her reputation for being rude to journalists, for projecting entitlement, and for having a mean girl persona. Many felt she didn't take the subject matter seriously enough, especially given that the film centered on domestic violence. People were also uncomfortable with her promoting alcohol and self-branded products during that press cycle. None of that required bots, coordination, or conspiracy. There is no meaningful similarity between what happened to Blake and what happened to Taylor, except for one convenient overlap. Some of the same online accounts may dislike both women. The far more obvious explanation is that they share overlapping fan and anti-fan communities. That's it. We also can't ignore that Rolling Stone is demonstrably favorable toward Taylor Swift. They gave her album 5 stars when many other critics didn't. They were one of the very few outlets to call it her best album ever. So yes, it raises eyebrows when a vague report from an unknown company just happens to land in the inbox of a reporter who is already sympathetic to Swift. What are the odds that a company no one had heard of suddenly ends up in the lap of that reporter? I don't believe in coincidences. And what are the odds that this report drops at the exact same time court documents are being unsealed in Blake Lively's case? Documents that reveal Taylor Swift was in communication with Blake during the period when Blake took over the film, that Taylor was allegedly present at the penthouse when Ryan Reynolds lost his temper with Justin Baldoni, that there was increasing online chatter about Taylor's involvement being deeper than what Tree Payne had been telling the press.
Then, suddenly, a report appears that ties together alleged smear campaigns against both Taylor and Blake and suggests a shared origin, one that subtly points the finger at Justin Baldoni without ever saying his name outright. It feels like accusation by implication, Taylor's saying it without saying it, Blake saying it without saying it, and honestly, I find that explanation far more believable than I find this report to be credible. If that's the case, then Taylor is doing exactly what Blake did, reframing valid criticism as an organized attack. And in my opinion, that's a tactic celebrities with fragile egos sometimes use to protect themselves when a project doesn't land the way they hoped, even if it sold well. Yes, the album sold, but anecdotally, I've spoken to far more people who didn't like it than people who loved it. Those people exist, but the praise hasn't been universal, and that's okay. Wouldn't it have been better to simply accept the criticism and move forward, rather than planting questionable evidence to discredit it? This is the same problem I had with Blake Lively doing this in the first place. It sets a precedent. It teaches celebrities that instead of engaging honestly with criticism, they can dismiss it as bots, bad actors, or smear campaigns. So if Tree Payne really did orchestrate this, and I'll be clear, that's my gut feeling, not a provable fact, then she's using the exact same playbook Blake Lively used, which raises the question, are Blake and Taylor really that different? You tell me. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Don't forget to give this video a thumbs up, subscribe if you haven't already, and click the bell so you never miss an upload. Thanks so much for watching. Bye!